Okay, with that said, I will turn it over to Anne to announce the first speakers.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Ann Gerwitz, and as Mitch said, this is the first session of Track 1 Digital and IT Strategy. And again, I'd like to remind everyone that all attendees have been muted. The discussion is being recorded. And if you have questions, please leave your contact information and questions in the chat. And I would like now to turn the mic over to our moderator for the discussion, David Cannon, who's the Executive Vice President of Infinity 3. David?
Thank you very much, Anne. Very good to be here, everyone. So this is a panel discussion. I have been asked to help moderate this. My background is in the IT service management space. I've been working with ITIL since the late 1980s and have seen the industry evolve over that time. Evolve is a generous word. There have been several shifts in the industry during that time. Some of them have not been very gentle. And I think today we're here to discuss another major shift that's happening in the industry. And this one also none too gentle. But I'm not going to be talking too much about digital and IT strategy and digital transformation specifically. What I'm going to do is to be facilitating a discussion with two other members of the panel who have joined me. One being David Seidel and the other one being Upinda Bawa. David is from Miami University. Upinda is from University of San Francisco. Both of them are CIOs and both of them have been dealing with digital transformation for a number of years. And so the purpose of today's discussion is to talk about what that means within a higher education context. We're not going to cover the basic definitions of digital transformation. EDUCAUSE has been very good in publishing several documents which talk about the definition of what digital transformation is and how higher education organizations should be approaching it. This is a practical viewpoint. This is a discussion about how digital transformation and digital strategy is being experienced within higher education institutions themselves. So if I can first ask David Seidel to introduce himself.
Sure. Pleasure to be here with all of you today. I am David Seidel. I am the VP for IT and CIO at Miami University. We frequently joke that if you're not familiar with us, we are the Miami that is actually in Ohio, in Oxford, which even confuses it even more for some folks. I've been at Miami for about 2.5 years, and I came into Miami looking at an institution that wanted to change and that was actively in the early throes of change. And so a lot of what we've been doing is building out that partnership approach, the thoughtful approach to IT, and also taking a phased approach to things like the cloud. And so it's been a lot of fun, and looking forward to talking to you all today.
Great. Thank you, David. Upinda.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, David. I'm Upinda Bawa. I'm one of the vice presidents at the University of San Francisco and the chief information officer. Informally, I'm also the chief technology officer, the CTO, so CDO, whatever you want to call it. A lot of titles these days. I've been with the University of San Francisco for about 7 years now, 7.5. And prior to that, I was with the University of California, San Francisco, the medical center. I was their CTO for about 8 years. And prior to that, I spent about 15 to 18 years in Silicon Valley with startups, corporations, and venture firms. And the digital journey for me with the higher education and healthcare started about 15 years ago when I joined the UCSF Medical Center, and 7 years ago when I joined USF. And I look forward to speaking about this today.
Great. Thank you both, and very good to be with you on this panel. Just a note to everybody participating, if you would like to ask questions or pose questions to the panelists, please do pop them into the chat and we'll pick them up and take them from there. Upinda, you raise a really interesting point. Digital transformation journey for you has been going for at least 15 years. And yet for many organizations, this whole context of digital transformation, it was around and then suddenly came into focus last year when we had to go virtual. But really, it's been around for a long time. What is different about digital transformation today versus as it was maybe when you started on the journey of 15 years ago?
David, I think one of the big differences was I probably was one of the few CIOs in higher education / healthcare that came from the private sector. And because I came from the private sector, and more importantly, Silicon Valley, my background was all cutting edge technologies, futuristic thinking, and planning and execution and implementation. And these are things that everybody struggled with in higher education and healthcare. So part of this journey was just I was a bit early in my abilities and my thinking and supporting these organizations to move forward. What transpired over the last probably 5 years, I'd say, a couple of things happened. One, I think everybody became more aware of cybersecurity and cyber threats. And I think that was a time when even university trustees and boards and presidents start to realize this is a real thing that's happening. Our data can be lost. And over time, everybody learned and they were educated. They educated themselves. They had, the CIOs educated them that part of that preventing security threats is the digital transformation. You've got to make changes to your entire system of how you operate and how you do things in order to prevent cyber threats. I think that was one. The other was just market forces. I think we've seen over the last probably 10 years, the number of universities that have actually closed because of financial pressures, declining revenues, declining enrollments. Financial pressures force you to do things more optimally. And technology plays a huge role, substantial role, in optimizing those things. The third thing I've seen is that the incoming presidents have a different level of understanding of technology and how useful it can be. There's no question about it. There's still a lot of resistance. But I'd say those are the 3-4 things that I can think of that really made the difference, or that mark. I would say it was a mark that I noticed about between 5 and 6 years ago.
Right, thank you. David, what has digital transformation meant for you in Miami?
I think when I think about digital transformation, I think that most of higher ed is used to thinking about it in an evolutionary path, and we were kind of walking there a lot of the time. And this last year has been, I think of it as a former security person, I think of it as incident response, right? We were responding, we were making the emergency work. And I think as we look forward, we're starting to think about revolution instead of evolution or response. And that revolution is really hard for higher ed to deal with because we're used to moving at a slower pace. We're used to tackling one thing at a time or otherwise approaching it a little differently. I think that what we're looking at now as an industry is we know we have a limited time frame before the revolution is going to subsume us, and we have to either get on the crest of that wave and ride it, or at least try to stop ourselves from drowning. And so we're in an exciting time, but it's also a really scary time. The last thing I'll say here. Oh, go ahead.
I just said, well said.
Thank you. The last thing I'll say is I'm a little worried about a rubber band effect. So we are now probably a little tired of all the rapid change we had to make. And if we fall too far back to our norms, we will miss this moment. And we have to keep those change muscles moving. We can probably make sure we get a little bit of a break. The human side is so important. We have to take care of the people who've made this year of change happen, but we also have to ride that wave and continue to make change a core value and a core part of what we're doing next.
That's a really good perspective, and it's revolution is a very strong word, and I think a very appropriate word. It implies that what is coming next is going to be different to what was before, and in fact will replace and sweep away what came before. And I think that's definitely something we see. So initially, I think organizations tend to focus on digital transformation as being, we do the same things, but we do them with different technology. But what I'm hearing from the two of you is that we're actually going to be starting to do new things, different things. Organizations will behave completely differently to the way they did before. So what is driving digital transformation in higher education? What are those changes that are happening that are driving this need for change?
I would say to begin with, what's driving the need for change is the declining enrollments and the challenging environment we find ourselves, and a more sophisticated consumer. I appreciate the fact that universities have a hard time thinking about students and their parents as consumers, but in essence, that's what's happening to our industry. That knowledge is becoming more consumable in different fractions. I'm not a big proponent of just online learning. I think that has a different set of issues. But technology does play a really good role in making sure that we modernize our learning and teaching abilities and using it as a complementary tool. I think the challenge that we continue to see is this evolution or this revolution is going to be caused by outside forces, not because we think we're going to do a better job or we think we need to modify and transform our industry. Has been caused by market forces, and those market forces are some of the things I mentioned: consumerism, for example, the declining number of students graduating high schools, which means fewer organizations are required, fewer universities are required, and also the financial pressures. Software companies have lived on licenses forever. Now they move to subscription models, which means their life cycles are extended substantially. Unfortunately, our world doesn't work that way. If one of our universities does not enroll a substantial set of new students every year, our health can decline to zero in 4 to 5 years. So we can go from being $100 million, $500 million organization to zero in just 5-6 years. And that's a difficult position for us to be in. So transforming ourselves to think about, how we work better in the future, how we teach better in the future, is a very large part of what the market forces are.
David, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add. What's interesting to me is that the declining enrollment, as we're seeing it right now, is not an even thing across the industry. We're seeing clusters of schools and types of schools that are succeeding or not succeeding differently, and the models are broken. In fact, that's one of the things I think that really stands out to me is when you talk to enrollment managers and when you talk to admissions folks, all of their models are broken right now. And this year's model is going to be different from next year's model and the year after that. And so they're watching trends, but they can't just say, well, last year was similar and we're going to be able to move forward. And so we're in a less predictable industry as well, which means we need to be in a more responsive industry. And we have to think about the things that will enable us to do that. And so a lot of the transformation that I'm seeing is enabling transformation to support those folks, whether it's moving towards being a more data-driven institution, or it's things that are, from a technology perspective, kind of simple but are compelling for higher ed, like chatbots. Go talk to a student, talk to somebody who's actually the age of our current students and ask them, would you rather pick up the phone, send an email, or talk to a chatbot? And do you want an actual human on the end of a conversation, or would you rather talk to the chatbot? A lot of time they'll say, a chatbot's not going to judge me. It's going to be faster than the human, and I'm going to get 90% of what I want out of that. And I talk to my peers and they say, well, I still pick up the phone, or I'd rather send an email. And we have to transform to meet our customer base. And so we're doing digital transformation to meet a group of customers who are used to interfacing with us in a different way, or think we should interface with them in a different way than historically higher ed has.
And David Cannon, to that point, one of the things that I know David and I talked about last time, David Sedlin and I talked about last time, it's the end user experience. It's the student's experience with technology that we really have to make an investment in. 30 years ago, we made investments in client server. 20 years ago, we understood project management was a big deal. We hired project managers. 10 years ago, we understood that, business transformation, business reengineering, business process reengineering requires business analysts. We needed to hire business analysts to actually get the job done. more recently, it's about end user experience. Everything has to do with how the technology works, how does it flow, how many steps do you need to do to execute something. And that's a very important attribute of digital transformation, is the simplification and improvement in end user experience.
An interesting thing that you both said was that the business models of higher education are changing. How do higher education institutions differentiate themselves with digital technology? I mean, for example, there's a fairly standard idea of what a higher education institution is. The kind of teaching that they'll give and the standard of degree that you'll obtain when you attend such an institution. But we're seeing a lot more organizations getting into the space and being competitive. How do the traditional higher education institutes differentiate themselves and make sure that they carve out a niche for themselves moving forward?
I think this is a really interesting one because it depends on the profile of your institution. It depends on how you instruct. So I'll use Miami as an example. Miami is a state school, so that puts us in a certain niche. We are a very undergraduate focused institution, so that's a different niche that we operate inside of. We do have graduate programs that are really excellent graduate programs. We tightly focus on undergraduate excellence. And then we are a really, really strong student-focused on-site institution. Some people call us a public Ivy because you come to campus and it is a brick campus and it is amazing and beautiful. And there's an experience to being here that's really important to the Miami education as well. And that is a specific set of things that Miami sells. That doesn't always translate incredibly well to a digital world. So then you have to figure out ways that the digital world can enhance that excellence, because that is the brand that we have and that is where we really succeed. So we look at things like how we're going to use our international program. We send hundreds of students over to Luxembourg, and there's an amazing program there. So how do we make campuses in different parts of the world work together? How do we make our regional campuses stronger along with our main Oxford campus and make them able to flow for students who are coming in and doing a couple of years of the regionals and coming to the main campus? And then as we did the pandemic response, we looked at ways to make our interpersonal connections really strong despite the distance the pandemic created. So can you create those communities that would normally exist inside of our living learning communities and our residence halls and take them out to other locations and make that work? That's hard, but that is a differentiator. Different institutions will approach it differently. The place I would be really nervous about being is being at a commodity institution that doesn't have as many differentiators. Those are the ones that I worry about the most, is if you just offer the same thing, if you are the generic aisle, you're going to have a lot harder time selling your institution in this transformed world.
Pinda, any insights to add?
I think Sadell said it very well. I think the only things I can, share, the business model change some of the differentiators, as David said. Location is going to be one of the most important things. I think you're going to see heavy concentrations of universities on either coasts and maybe a little bit in the Midwest. I think you're going to see a larger, the smaller institutions, unless they're highly, highly elite and they offer something very, 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 very unique, they're going to be most challenged with enrollments and therefore financial pressures. I think you're going to see, so I think location is going to be one of the main differentiators. The second is going to be curriculum. They've got to have a in-depth and breadth to attract. The social activities are always going to be one of the driving factors, because that's one of the reasons why students come to universities, is to socialize. Technology is the fourth. Technology is an enabler. Technology makes sure that the experience that they're having with the first three priorities is as easy and smooth as possible. They should not be spending their time administratively trying to conduct business with the university. It should be like a no-brainer. Great example is payments. When anytime they will need to make a payment, they should be able to do that through their phone, no matter what they're paying for. They're same thing with the parents. It shouldn't be that somebody's sending a check, they're doing bank transfers. That those should be nice options, but the experiences are the most important.
Great.
And the same thing for the staff and faculty. The staff and faculty are a key part of this. Their experience has also got to improve. Recently, last year, 2 years ago, we started to undertake a project to remove all paper processes from the university. We have 180 forms that people filled out and walked around and got signed. So not only are we limiting the paper, we're also optimizing the processes to say, why do you need 7 signatures on this before it gets into the system? It should be only 3 signatures, and then the system is automatically updated. Nobody needs to type it in. So it changes the way faculty and staff interact with computers and paper.
Great. So we have a couple of questions coming in, and I'd like to segue into one of them. And then, Joe, you asked a question I'm going to come to later because it fits into this next part of this discussion. But to summarize what I've heard from both of you so far is that digital transformation does not mean a wholesale move into online teaching methods. So we're not going to take universities going, this is not a change to the entire industry of higher education, but it does mean changing the way we do things within our institutions, not only making them more automated, easier to use, but also introducing new ways of doing things that are more suitable for the kind of students and the kind of relationships that we have with all stakeholders. Now, with that in mind, one of the questions Julia asked is, how do you think community colleges fit into this new world? And how do we address equality in that context?
I think community colleges are a really interesting intersection of under a lot of threat from commoditization, and also are incredibly valuable for people in their area. And that's a lot of tension there. If you cannot deliver, and there is an online institution that's going to give a similar or higher caliber of education, has a better reputation, you may not make it through. If you have a reason to exist, if you have a reason that students want to come get that on-site education or that local education and have access to it, there are compelling reasons why a community college can be really excellent. And each institution, and all of our institutions are looking at this there. How do we stay relevant? How do we become better than we are, and what do we do? I think community colleges have the same thing. I feel like they're a little closer in the threat range than some of the established, the Ivy League is going to be the Ivy League. They have a lot more cash to float on if they don't transform right away. The other thing, and the more important thing here, is the equity side of things for me. And I think that the more people we can get college educated and have that set of experiences, the better. And I worry that if community colleges are not there and really accessible and building that educational experience, we will lose out. And I worry, because I feel like they are more under threat, that value could be lost along the way. Binder?
I share David Siddall's perspective on this, and one of the most important assets of any community, and I do worry that they're going to be most challenged. I wish more organizations, corporations, local corporations partnered with community colleges more than just being online or giving at least options to people. I also think it's going to challenge all universities, maybe especially the community colleges, to market their products better, to become better at marketing and branding. Why is an associate's degree better and more important than a 6-month course from Google, which can get you a $60,000 job? Now, I'm not saying that's not a good thing. Google has offered incredible assets and product to various people to improve their learnings, absolutely. But it's not the same thing. And I think we've got to get better at explaining and communicating and expressing what is the value of an associate's degree. What's the value of an undergrad degree? What's the value of a master's degree? And value does not equal salary only. That's a very core component of the value. But value has to be established between what we all produce and deliver and what the consumer then ultimately sees. And community colleges will be challenged with the same issue.
Great. And I see a number of comments coming through in the chat as well. And thank you. Please keep those coming. It was very helpful. Some great perspectives. And what it comes down to for me is that the language that the two of you are talking is not an IT language, it's a business language. You're talking the language of the universities and multiple stakeholders through those universities. So I'm going to move on to the next section, and there are a couple of questions I'm going to come to a little bit later there, but whose responsibility is digital transformation?
CIO. I think the CIOs have an opportunity to step up. I realize it's not easy. I realize this is not in our DNA. I realize we didn't grow up in universities this way. I think we are leaders. Is it only our responsibility? No, of course not. It's the cabinet, it's the president, but the CIO can be a transformation agent and a transformation leader if they choose to, or he or she, or they choose to.
I'd agree. I think the CIO more and more is hired to do that, but then they have to build a coalition, right? I can rant and rave on campus all day long about how we have to transform. And if I am not taking my peers and other leaders and everybody else on campus along with me, all they're going to do is say, oh, that crazy guy's over there, turn the technology on for us and go away. We've got what we need. So we may be the crazy person dancing on the hillside, if you've ever seen the guy dancing on the hillside. But once we get a few more people dancing with us, then it's a dance party and we'll all move forward.
Now, interestingly, both of you had some very interesting techniques that you used to start getting that agenda onto the table of the various other stakeholders in the universities. Would you be able to share some of that with us?
I'm actually, I think I saw Chaz Grundy in our last session, so I'm going to shout out to Chaz Grundy if you've not seen one of his talks before. But Chaz is one of the world's best instigators that I know. And he regularly would find ways when I was at Notre Dame to get the community engaged. And so one example that we really took advantage of was quite a few years ago when we took Notre Dame to Google. And we built an entire Jedi training system. So everybody knows that IT geeks respond well to a bunch of these fun things. And so we had Padawan and Jedi Knight and Master Yoda levels of training and certification. I bought a Star Wars prop grade replica lightsaber and had it outside of my office as a giveaway for people who engaged in the training and the process that we were in. We gave away mugs with custom designed cartoon characters that described your level, all kinds of things. It takes enthusiasm. It takes thinking about what's going to appeal to your community. It takes making it visible. It takes all of these things. You have to understand where you're working to, and then you have to make sure it sticks, and then keep doing it over and over until it's there. And once you've done that, then people are going to think you can do that every time. And you have to be a little careful about that too, because there's only so many times you can turn the entire ship that quickly, but it's well worth doing.
And I know that you spend a lot of time going out to faculty members, for example. You don't just wait for people to come to you. Is that part of the key of getting this working?
Absolutely. If you just sit in the IT building, which many of you are probably not even in the core of campus, my IT building is off on a secondary campus that's right next to our main campus, but was added some years ago. When I got here, my peers on our leadership team weren't quite sure where my building was. And I said, okay, my new mission is for everybody on the leadership team at the president's cabinet level to know where my building is. And then I want them to know that they're going to see me regularly. And so I got here and I went to all the deans and I said, I want to meet with you. And they said, what? And I said, well, I want to meet with you. It's what CIOs do. And they said, well, no CIO has ever met with us before. So I knew I was starting at the ground level and had to build up from there. They're now used to seeing me a couple times a year and having good conversations. Bhupinder, I know you've done some fun things on your side too. What'd you do?
Yeah, I think David, very much similar. I think there were 3 or 4 things that I can think of that we did. One was exactly that similar. We started meeting with each of the vice presidents and each of the school deans twice a year. And it was their associate deans and my direct reports. And we sit down and we walk through a 10-slide presentation. What have we accomplished together the last 6 months? And what are we going to work on together the next 6 months? And that has been a huge shift in change and appreciation and really, really respect for the IT organization. It was also my direct reports. I can't speak enough about how an incredible team they are. Half of them come from the private sector, half of them come from the higher education, and they've come together in an incredibly meaningful way in understanding that the challenges that face in the future are very different. Collaboration, the ability to communicate business value, the ability to communicate at an innovation level are things that they've really learned over time. One of the boldest moves I think that I made, and my president told me such, was one of the things I noticed was the board of trustees in universities, they've been there for 20, 30, 40 years. A lot of them are business local community leaders. They're the local community leaders or they're business leaders. So when I'm sitting in a board meeting talking about technology, there was very few people in that meeting that understood exactly what I was referring to, even though I presented in business terms. One of the decisions I made was to change the board of trustee committee on IT to include 2 external CIO expert advisors. These are CIOs of actually public corporations. And when I added them to the board meeting, there was a huge change in the way the committee conducted business. Decisions that used to take 6 months or a year because we had to come back and present again and again on a topic and to seek approval, we're down to like 1-hour meetings where the board of trustees turn to the advisors and say, what do you think? And I encourage them to speak their words. Now, you can imagine it's daunting having 2 CIOs look over your shoulder and supporting or challenging what you're presenting. But it was a huge change in atmosphere, in attitude, in the ability to communicate. The credibility that those 2 CIOs gave me was immense, more than I could get in 10 years. So, those are a handful of things that I've done, and there's many, many more. But, that's what led to the sea of change that David Siddell referred to. Excellent. I would say excellent progress.
Great. Thank you so much, both. I'm going to move on to some questions now. And one, which is related to what we've been saying. We have people, this is from Joe Cameron, we have people in mid-level management positions who are trying to drive these agendas. Do you have any words of encouragement or suggestions for them?
I think one, I would go back to what David said earlier. One is about meeting regularly with key stakeholders. I think don't wait for committee meetings. Don't wait for collaborative organizational decisions. You meet people in smaller groups, like a college dean and their associate deans. I think meeting with them regularly helps. Having a structure to those meetings is very important. I already mentioned that we have a 10-slide deck that we walk through. One of the things we actually did was create 2 different types of roadmaps. One's an 18-month roadmap that tells you what is 18 months. And then we have a 3-year plan. What are we going to think of? What are the big items that we're going to be faced with over 3 years? And having those 2 tools made a huge difference in, again, credibility, conversation, and collaboration. And it was appreciated every single time we showed that. It's highly appreciated.
Great. Anything to add, David?
I really like what Upinder said. I think when I think about mid-level managers, the relationships that we have are the stitches that hold the cloth of campus together. And as a CIO, I'm going to be just one stitch holding things together. I rely on my direct reports and my mid-level managers to understand our partners across campus at a much more detailed level and to be able to engage with them really directly. And they set tone, that tone makes its way up. We set tone, that tone makes its way down. And if we're on the same page, that fabric is really strong. If we're not, it's going to come apart. And so as a mid-level manager, you have to understand you are one of the most important connections we have to what's really happening on campus every day. And what you do is going to make that happen or not.
Great.
David Cannon, let me give you a very specific example of what David's talking about. So when we meet with these deans, one of the things that I've educated my direct reports to do before the meeting is the work that we've done over the last 6 months. they need to reach out to the manager who's going to report on that on the business side. So the report in the meeting is actually coming from the business owner who was part of that project. That forces them to have a good relationship and reach out and collaborate on a regular basis at a most junior level. And that's what shines in the meeting when people are really good, cordial, friendly. They're reporting on each other's great work. So I think that's a concrete example of what David just mentioned.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, another question. I don't think we're going to be able to get through all the questions, but here's one from Linda Ong, and that is about retaining IT staff. Given that some organizations outside of higher ed are a lot more, fast moving, her concern is that it may be difficult to retain IT staff who may be attracted by some of those organizations on the other side. Have any input or insight into that?
I think you're going to hear similar stories, but very different perspectives, because I'm in the Midwest and I'm in a small community. So we compete a little differently. Working from home is changing that, though. What I found to be the most compelling thing is to remember that if you can make people enjoy their work, right? Fun at work, doing work that is meaningful, doing work that allows you to connect is big. And those staff you'll retain. And the staff who want more money to live somewhere that's not where you're at, those things, you may not be able to retain them, but they should enjoy their time with you so that they tell their friends that they should go work for you. And even if they only stay for a little while, you'll be stronger for it. But we have to recognize that not everybody will stay. The ones who do, we should make sure that we are paying as well as we can, that we're taking care of them. They have a reason to want to be there.
I would concur, David. I think people come to higher education not for the money. They come because this is their calling. This is where they feel comfortable. They feel some compelling reason to be a part of this industry. Most people feel at home. This is where they want to be. And I think the key to hiring is you've got to look for those people. Some people are going to bring value for 2-3 years, and some people will be here for 20 years. And you've just got to find a balance between those things and not try and do something to perfection. We also found that, for very rare skills, outsourcing is better. Rather than trying to hire and retain employees, it's better just to outsource some of the work. And I'm talking things like mobile development, Salesforce, Workday, integrations. So even some of those cutting edge technologies, you may need to outsource because it's not worth hiring 1 or 2 people and losing them every couple of years. So it's got to be a combined strategy. It's not a one thing that's going to solve all the issues.
Great. And we are now at 30 seconds left until the end of our time. Thank you both very much for your insights on this area. And I think we've learned, at least what I've learned, is that as much as the world is changing, some of the things we've relied on to be successful in the past are really important. Communication, understanding the business, keeping in touch with changes as they happen, focusing on what's valuable, and making sure that we're able to continue delivering on what is valuable to all stakeholders. So thank you all very much, or thank you both very much for joining me on the panel. And thank you to all the attendees that are on the call for joining us. Thank you all.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, David, and thank you, the panelists, and again, everyone in the audience who participated. And I think, Mitch, you were recording. If you could stop this recording so